This week we get to talk about the brain and the cranial nerves. Both very exciting. The brain is quite complex. We're just briefly going to scratch the surface this week, as well as the cranial nerves. The cranial nerves will be looking to learn the name, number, and function. The brain, we're going to look to learn the different regions of the brain, as well as the blood supply to it. So here's the main regions of the brain. You've got the cerebrum, which includes the large area. We also call that the telencephalon. Below that and posterior to, we have the cerebellum. That's going to be your movement and your coordination center. You've got your diencephalon, which is going to be the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland. You've got your midbrain. That's just going to be right below the thalamus and also would be included in the brainstem. If we were to say the brainstem, that would make up the midbrain, the pons, and of course the medulla oblongata. When we look at brains, we get to look at this in several different views. Cross sections are kind of a neat way to look at it. This is probably my favorite way, is looking at it with a sagittal slice. So this would be looking at it from the top down or from behind, and now looking from the side. We've got all sorts of different parts here. You're going to have the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla with the cerebellum there. And then you've got different lobes of the brain. So I'm going to flip this around 180 degrees. You've got the frontal lobe, and then you have the precentral gyrus and the postcentral gyrus. So the postcentral gyrus, you would hear it called the somatosensory cortex. And what that means is that everything you feel, all of those sensations, are going to go into this area of the brain. All of your motor then, or your response to those sensations, will go here to the precentral gyrus, or the primary motor cortex. Posterior to that, you've got the parietal lobe, and posterior or inferior to that, you've got the occipital lobe. One lobe we've left out here is going to be the lateral one, and that is the temporal lobe. So we'll learn a little bit more about these lobes, the occipital lobe and the temporal lobe, next semester when we do vision and sound. The temporal lobe is known as the auditory cortex, and the occipital lobe is known as the visual cortex. So I won't go through every single slide, but we'll want to know, the blood supply to the brain. There are two main vessels that we look at when we're talking blood supply to the brain. One of them is going to be, I don't know why this keeps glitching on me. One of them is, if I can get this to move. Okay, so one of them is going to be the carotid arteries. You've probably heard of the carotid arteries. And so we've got this right here. That's your common carotid artery. This is the one that is pulsatile. This is the one we're going to check if we're wondering if somebody's alive and we walk upon a scene of a tragic accident. We're going to be checking the common carotid artery. That common carotid artery then goes to the internal carotid artery and the external carotid artery. We get two branches there. We call it a bifurcation when we turn into two different vessels. And so the external carotid artery, that's going to continue on, and that's going to supply all of these vessels to the external parts of the skull, all of the superficial, all of the facial structures. Then the other half of that vessel after the bifurcation is the internal carotid. That internal carotid goes into the brain or into the cranial cavity and thus supplies blood to the brain. It is a major player with blood. So if we have a stroke, then there's a good chance that it's coming from this internal carotid. We do have one other option, however, this little squiggly one here, and that's the vertebral artery. So between the carotid artery and the vertebral artery, that is, the internal carotid artery and the vertebral artery, that's 100% of where our brain blood supply comes from. So you're getting roughly 2/3 on the right-hand side from the internal carotid artery and roughly 1/3 from the vertebral artery. So if you added those two vessels on the right together, that's 50% of the blood supply. We go to the other side, and now we've got another third and another 2/3 from the internal carotid artery and the vertebral carotid artery. Now, strokes, if you're familiar with strokes, most of those strokes are going to occur on the internal carotid artery with very few on the vertebral artery. In fact, I believe it's less than 10%. Here's the brainstem itself. Brainstem, again, that's going to be your midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata, your midbrain, cerebellum. All of these are going to have different functions to them. So go through these, read the different functions, and begin to understand what their purpose is. Here's the functional region of the cerebral cortex. So this is going to show you a little bit of what I talked about earlier, but now we're going to add in a bunch of other things. So you can see the somatosensory area, or the postcentral gyrus. Now, I think I didn't mention this earlier, but gyrus means elevation and sulcus means depression. So when you see on this picture where it says central sulcus, that means it is the middle and it is a depressed area of the brain. If we go to the primary somatosensory area, that we would also call that the primary somatosensory, or the postcentral gyrus, because that is an elevated portion of the brain. You're also going to throw in some other areas here. You're going to have the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. All of these have to do with speech and comprehension of speech. You can see the primary visual area, the visual association area, all in the occipital lobe. So again, occipital lobe, visual cortex. Higher thinking is in the frontal lobe. Parietal lobe is going to be a lot of our sensory, our taste, all of the vibration, sharpness, dull, smooth, rough. A lot of that's going to go to the primary somatosensory area and association area. Then you've got your temporal lobe with your auditory association and speech recognition, speech compilation, all of that fun stuff. And this is very superficial, but very, very, very interesting. They've actually mapped out the brain in even more depth than this, but unless you're going to be a brain surgeon, I don't think that will be quite necessary. All right, so let's I'm trying to remember what this picture is. There's the left and right cerebral hemispheres. So basically what they're showing you is that you have a left brain and a right brain. So then we go, the left brain is, just the things you've probably heard even as a layperson. You would know that the left brain is responsible for language and calculation, while the right hemisphere is responsible for visual, emotional, and artistic awareness. And then each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body. So the right side will control the left will control the right. If we look in here at the inside, let me make this disappear. Now we've got this structure here. This is the corpus callosum. So these are interhemispheric connections. So we're going to call these basically the left brain and the right brain are going to communicate between the two sides, and that's how we integrate things is through this corpus callosum there. Next up, we've got the cranial nerves. Cranial nerves all come off of the brainstem, so that would include the midbrain, which we can't quite see. There we go. So there's the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. They are numbered from superior to inferior, and they are numbered 1 through 12. So cranial nerve 1 would be all the way up on the pons, and I can't quite, let's see here. I might have to eliminate some stuff here. See if we can get in there. There we go. So there's cranial nerve 1. That's the olfactory cranial nerve. That's the one that goes to your nose, so that's one that allows you to perceive the outside world with your sense of smell. Cranial nerve 2 then is going to go to your eyes, and I'm not sure if they show it here. Right there. Oh, can't quite get to it. There we go. Cranial nerve 2, and so on and so forth. So again, we're going to go from superior to inferior, all originating on the brainstem themselves, with the brainstem including the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Then we take those and we need to know what they do. We need to know if they are sensory, meaning are they perceiving things? Are they motor? Are they causing an action? Or the other option is both. They are perceiving things and they are causing an action. So there are mnemonics. I would encourage you to get on YouTube and find the mnemonic for memorizing this, learning all 12 cranial nerves. So we want name, number, and function. And so here's showing you the special So we've got 1, 2, and 8 here. These are going to transmit the sensory signals for special senses. Next up, we've got the cranial nerves, and that's going to be 3, 4, 6, 11, and 12. So all of these are going to be strictly motor. Then our next batch, we get the mixed, and that's going to be 5, 7, 9, and 10, meaning they will both do sensory and motor. So they'll perceive things and they will cause an action. Now we're going to go through all of those nerves and what those special senses do. And where we will cut this week's lesson off is going to be at the end of the cranial nerves here. Then we get into the somatic and autonomic nervous system. So take a look at that information. Somatic and autonomic. Somatic would be nerves that control your muscular system. So if I want to flex my bicep, that is done with a somatic nerve. But digestion, so once I've eaten a great hamburger from Red Robin's, enters my digestive tract, and once it's in the alimentary canal, I no longer have control of that. That is done by the autonomic nervous system. That is autorhythmic, completely out of my control, and it is done by the body behind the scenes, so to speak. So heart rate, the beat of your heart is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, whereas somatic, that is going to be things that you have control of. So you want to go all the way down through here, and then we stop. We don't need to get into 23. Section 23 is where we will begin in the beginning of the second half of this class, Bio H212. So then we'll begin with vision and hearing, taste, and so on and so forth. So we'll begin to look at all of that next semester. This is our last lesson before the final. The final will be the exact same format as the midterm, where we will have a majority of dissection questions with about 10 to 12 multiple choice questions and 40 to 42 dissection questions. The timeline will be exactly the same, so I believe that was somewhere around 50 minutes for the 40 questions and somewhere around 13 minutes for the 12 questions. I didn't have anybody even come close to going over those times, if I recall, and so I think that worked well. Everybody did extremely well on the grading. I will put out a practice test, so it will have as many questions as I can put in there. However many are in the bank is what I will put into the practice exam. I will set that practice exam up where it will draw 25 questions, so it will at most allow me to put 250 per exam. So if I have to make A, B, and C practice tests and have 250 questions each, whatever that ends up being, I will do that. And then each time you open that test, it will be a brand new selection of questions. It will draw 25 questions, burn through it, click it again, it'll grab another 25 questions randomly, and just keep going over and over and over. And then our our final will be 1 week from Tuesday, which would put us at, let's take a look at the calendar here. That puts us at the 21st. So on the 21st, we will have our final exam. I will have that open from 8 a.m. on the 21st until that Thursday at 8 p.m. So it will be open all of Tuesday, all of Wednesday, and most of Thursday. Then at 8 p.m. on that Thursday, that's when we would want all of your quizzes and homework assignments turned in, and the two portions of the final exam turned in. If you have any questions, let me know. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Bye.